Andrew Williamson here. Welcome back to Williamson Education. In our last unit, we took a deep dive into a particular part of speech, pronouns. We looked at the capacities of that part of speech, as well as the problems that can arise when pronouns are not used correctly. Now, pronouns are a relatively complex part of speech with lots of things that can go wrong. And among the parts of speech, we've also looked in depth at nouns and verbs, two other complex parts of speech that are essential to the grammar of sentences. Now, you must be wondering by this point, what about the other parts of speech that we mentioned in that first lecture? Don't they get any love? They do. They do get some love. In fact, we're going to spend the next unit polishing off the remaining 6 parts of speech, delving into the topics that can arise alongside these various elements of the English language. The topic of today's class is a part of speech that is often confused with pronouns, namely prepositions. We'll spend our lesson learning to identify prepositions and then talking about some of the more challenging use cases of this often overlooked part of speech. Let's begin back at the beginning. What is a preposition after all? We've already touched on this point in the first lecture, but now allow me to give you a more formal definition. According to the Oxford English Dictionary, my favorite source of information about the English language, a preposition is, quote, a word which typically precedes a noun, noun phrase, or pronoun, and expresses a relationship between it and another word in the sentence. After, at, by, for, from, in, on, to, and with are all common prepositions in English. The OUD refers to prepositions as words that establish relationships between nouns and other words and sentences. More specifically, prepositions often establish relationships of space and time. For example, consider the following sentence. I will come to your house after the game. In this sentence, we have 2 prepositions, to and after. In the first case, the preposition to expresses a relationship of space. It indicates where I will go. In the second case, the preposition after expresses a time relationship. It indicates when I will go. Taken together, these 2 prepositions establish the crucial point that this part of speech often serves to establish space and time relations between words. Of course, to and after are not the only prepositions in English. There are many more of these words. In fact, there are over 100 prepositions in the English language, and by most counts, there are closer to 150 of them, as a matter of fact. It will take you time to learn all of the prepositions and to learn how they are used. If you've already heard of prepositions before coming to this class, then there's a rule you may have heard involving prepositions too. Maybe you've heard this rule: never end a sentence with a preposition. And if you've heard this rule, you might be wondering, why is it that I should never end a sentence with a preposition? Well, the answer is in the name of this part of speech itself. Prepositions, prepositions. That prefix pre means before. And in fact, prepositions are words that come before the nouns they place into relations with other words and sentences. The word that the preposition comes before has a special name. It's called the object of the preposition. So in my earlier example sentence, I will come to your house after the game, the words house and game are the objects of the prepositions to and after, respectively. So it's not so much that the problem is ending a sentence with a preposition per se. It's that the preposition cannot precede its object if the preposition comes at the end of the sentence. You can't have a preposition come before an object when the preposition is the final word in the sentence. That said, like so many of the so-called rules we've encountered together, this rule about never ending a sentence with a preposition is broken by native speakers constantly. And by constantly, I mean constantly. Consider this sentence, for example. Who did you send the letter to? Sounds pretty fine in English, right? Well, the grammatically correct version of the sentence is actually different. Here it is. To whom did you send the letter? In other words, in the second supposedly correct version of the sentence, the preposition to precedes the object of the preposition whom. And that works well. That's how prepositions and objects of prepositions are supposed to work. In reality, though, rules in English are made to be broken, as we know. No one really follows this rule that would lead you to speak the second supposedly correct example sentence here. People who speak and write like that get looked at a little funny. I don't encourage you to speak like that. Don't get looked at funny. One theme of these classes has been that rules in English are made to be broken. Another theme is that the way we do things in English is not, certainly not, the only way to do things in a language. In English, we have prepositions that come before the objects they place in relation to other objects in sentences. In other languages, however, there are so-called postpositions. These are words that come after their objects and that place these objects into relations and sentences. Mandarin Chinese, for example, has numerous location-based postpositions. There are positional words that come before their objects, and there are positional words that come after their objects. Guess what? In some languages, there's even such a thing as a circumposition, which includes two components that go around the object. Truly, the world of languages is rich, diverse, and fascinating in its varieties. I cannot go an entire lesson on prepositions without letting you know about a bit of a tricky topic that we have on the horizon. That topic is called idioms. You must be wondering, what's an idiom? There are many different kinds of idioms in English, but in essence, idioms involve ways of speaking in groups of words that are unique to particular places. Take this phrase. Let's say I ask you a question. Would you like to go to the movies this afternoon? If you were in America, and if you wanted to respond to me in a casual manner, you might say, I'm down. That would mean that you're willing to go see the movie with me. Strangely, you could also say, I'm up for it, and that would mean the exact same thing. Don't ask me to explain why. Basically, idioms are ways of speaking that indicate a certain meaning that is not necessarily logical, reasonable, or comprehensible to a person who is not from the place where that idiom is dominant. The reason I raise the topic of idioms here is that they often involve prepositions. One of my favorite examples for teaching idioms involves the word different. Consider the word different. Many people think that the correct way of using the word different is to use it with the comparative word than, as in, I am different than my friend. Unfortunately, this idiom is incorrect because it involves a redundant comparative word. The word than should be used in coordination with comparative adjectives such as taller, faster, and stronger. No, instead, if you are in America, you should say different from, as in, I am different from my friend. He likes pineapple on pizza, and I do not. But guess what? That idiom I just taught you is not a universal idiom. In England, for example, you will often hear native speakers using the idiom different to, as in, my mom is different to her neighbor, who likes to stay up playing music late at night. That's right, the word different itself involves different prepositional idioms, depending on which English-speaking country you are from. It's the perfect example of an idiom. I actually find idioms to be among the hardest topics in the English language, maybe even harder than verb tense. Yes, there are irregular verbs that don't follow the normal rules, but these are relatively few compared to the prepositional idioms in English. They are especially few when considered in light of the fact that idioms in English differ from one place to another. While you might be able to make yourself well understood with an American English idiom, that does not mean the same idiom will work just as well in England, Australia, or South Africa. But the thing that makes English challenging, its regional variations, is the same thing that makes it such a fascinating language. I love encountering quirky new idioms in my travels to foreign countries. I like to think of these different idioms as being like the local food. Yes, you can get a slice of pizza in Italy, in New Haven, in New York, or in New South Wales, but it will not be the same slice. Every region will have its unique recipe with its local water and flour and techniques. These local differences are what make travel worthwhile, what give us reasons to fly across continents, and what cause peoples to take pride in the places they are from. Well, that's all for our lesson on prepositions here for today. We'll revisit idioms at some length in a later unit. Looking forward to seeing you right back here at Williamson Education for the next installment. Spread the word.